Oh, can we go shopping too? Just kidding. My legs and knees won't make it. I have to go in a chair. Good. Well, you told me, you mentioned it. Here, say yes. Did you say?
Oh, okay.
How long walk off the mountain?
No.
Mr. Sizemore, are you still with us?
Okay.
I'm still here, Bob.
Okay.
He called in?
He did.
You did. All right, folks, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'd like to call this meeting to order, and you have the agenda in front of you. After the consent agenda, Ms. Baldwin has a document that she would like to give each and every one of you a copy. And Ms. Baldwin, if you'll just take just a couple minutes and explain what it is. We're not going to discuss it or anything like that, but just kind of tell what it is in just a couple of minutes whenever we get to that point. And so we have the agenda. We don't really have a flag, so we can't say the Pledge of Allegiance, I don't guess, can we? But I would like to have a moment of silence before we start the meeting, if that's okay. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
All right, is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Aye.
All right, so let's just bow our heads for a moment of silence real quick. All right, thank you very much. We met in closed session a few minutes ago. We discussed, we had some attorney-client privileged information that we discussed, and we had a personnel matter that we discussed. Moving on to the action agenda for today. Here she goes.
Grand entrance.
All right, so we have the budget amendment number 9 to close out the 2011-12 school year. Is there a motion to approve the amendment number 9?
I'll make a motion, Mr. Chairman.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, any discussion? And just, let's see. Okay, any questions, discussion, questions? No?
I'll make a
No?
motion.
Well, I do have a question. When it was posted online, I know we got a lot of information late this time. Does anybody, I don't know if Ms. Parker knows when this was posted.
So an email from Ms. Jackson, was it Monday?
Yeah, I sent an email out to the board for the budget amendment or the budget
And
resolution.
the resolution was posted earlier.
Well, and I think it's important for everyone to realize that there are literally last minute changes that have to be made in order to fully utilize the budget, just as a general statement. And that's part of the efficiency of our finance department, is making sure we're utilizing every penny that we possibly can in our budget. And that's, nothing has been more important, especially in the times that we have to work with our funding. We have to make sure that we're utilizing every penny, and sometimes that requires some last minute changes. So.
I mean, I thought it was a good explanation. I really don't have any questions. Though just a comment, I thought it'd be interesting, and I'm sure I've run across this, or will run across this, but, and this is such a small piece, but the percentage of our budget that's grants seems to be, I would anticipate it's going like that. It'd be interesting to see that trended. No at all rush, but that'd be an interesting thing. And I think that's something the school system wants to do. And so it'd be interesting to have it in front of us to see if we're actually doing that. That's just a thought.
Ms. Parker, and I know this is probably too early to ask this question, but do you have any idea at this point where we stand in our budget, especially I think our local funding has pretty much stayed the same from previous year. Do you have any idea where we're gonna fall with our state funding as of?
Well, I've just had a
Oh.
good rehearsal that I was with a reporter until,
Okay.
just moments ago.
Didn't the governor just veto that budget this morning?
Well, she said she was going to. I don't know if she's actually signed it, but I listened to her press conference. It's on the WRAL website, the local ABC affiliate there. And I think she did a pretty good job of explaining why she felt it necessary to veto it. When I first heard it, I was shocked. But as I was telling Julie Ball, we prepared the budget that we brought to you with our long-range financial plans was based on the second year of the biennium budget the General Assembly passed last year. And with the newer budget that the General Assembly had passed, there was about a $2.4 million reduction in the amount of funding we have to pay to the state. But there was also a considerable tightening up of the ABC transfers and how we could use those. And there was also a 1.2% pay raise that at the very last minute, kind of overnight, changed from a one-time payment to something that affected the base. And most people may think, well, what does it matter, you know, if it's one time or ongoing? But if it's ongoing, it affects the local supplement
Right.
cost. If it's a one-time payment, it doesn't. So all of a sudden, that got thrown in there. And just my kind of gut level feeling was that that was all gonna kind of balance out. You know, I didn't think there, you know, would be a huge amount more money than we had anticipated happening, because particularly that restriction on the ABC transfers.
So we could
was-
potentially lose more of our flexibility
Well,
in that.
oh
I know
yeah,
there's
I mean, that
all
was
some-
part and parcel of the whole package of the thing. It's one reason that they felt they could afford the more generous budget was they were restricting our ability to increase it beyond what they thought they were giving us is, you know, I guess the best way I can think of to explain that. So my overall feeling was that the version that came out of the General Assembly, I think on June 21st or whatever, might have been slightly more favorable to us in terms of our being able to expand our programs or services, but it wouldn't have been a revolutionary change. So the latest thinking is that probably there is not going to be an override of her veto. That was what NCASA put out this morning. If that happens, we will have the budget that was passed last year, which is what we've been planning for ever since last year. So, and we're in a better situation, I think, than most other units in the state because we've saved half of our edgy jobs money. So, you know, we weren't planning to have to make any more staffing cuts or programmatic cuts this next year. So, you know, we'll, if it's not overridden, we'll proceed with the plan we've had all along. If it is overridden and we've got that new concept that came, it'll all depend on how those three factors balance out. The pay increase, which is now going to affect local much more than it would have because it's into base. The restrictions on the ABC transfers, you know, which will reduce my ability to kind of multiply the funds to the loaven fishes number. I like that better than the shell game reference. So, you know, and, you know, so we're going to have to wait to sort it out. But in either case, you know, I think that financing plan that we had is still viable, and things might be a little better than that, but I don't think they're going to be any worse because we already banked on the second year of biennial budget. So.
And just to follow up on that ABC transfer, if you don't have the answer right now, I certainly understand, but do you have a rough idea of how much state money we were unable to use because?
Oh, I know exactly
Right.
how much state money we were
Because
we
of
were
losing
unable
that
to use.
flexibility, and I think it's important that
Yeah.
everyone understand that.
It was well over $4 million. At that budget resolution, if you look at the state public school fund, it says $134,000. Our actual expenditures were $129 million.
So $4 million in state
In the
money
position
that we
allotments.
were not able.
And I actually have a little chart, I debated giving it to you, but
Okay.
Tony said, no.
Okay.
They're never gonna understand, and it's gonna take too long to try to explain it. But yeah, there's over $4 million in the position allotments that I had to leave on the table because I was not able to do the transfers that I was last year. Last year, I left $1 million on the table
Mhm.
because it was more restricted than the year before, in which I got $1 million more than they thought they were giving me. because of the transfers. So the swing, over a 2-year period, just from those little words when they, you don't think it relates to money when they talk about the ABC transfers. There's, I think it was $5.8 million swing over 2 years in how I was able to use the position allotments because of restrictions. And now they're talking about getting more restrictive yet.
So we could actually go above $4 million next year.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And for the board, the efficiency work, there's a private CPA firm that worked with school systems on efficiency and saving money. Wasn't it ABC transfers and low wealth funding and other pots of money that they were using with the loads and fish approach?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that how they were showing the savings?
Yeah,
for the school system?
absolutely.
So Buncombe County's doing what other systems have been shown
Mhm.
by others to do.
Yeah, in fact,
This will affect those
two
systems
kind of
too.
principals with Hank Hurd, who was in Durham at the time, and Ricky Lopes, who's still in Cumberland, works with him. I mean, the three of us were the ones that kind of talked about this concept and got it going to begin with. so.
Did they talk about that going away at the conference? Because I know Ricky
ABC
Lopes,
transfer
was that a big
process.
thing that Ricky said,
It wasn't
talk
a
about
big
it?
thing, it was mentioned.
Okay, but he did talk about the fact that that would reduce the availability of funding positions and things.
Well, they sent me a copy of their PowerPoint, and they actually had not updated it to reflect these new restrictions. So their PowerPoint was more the past way with things you could do. What they tried to do was just a big overview of everything in local government, or local school district finance in North Carolina. So they really didn't treat in the PowerPoint that I saw the impact of the more restrictive language on the ability of folks to do that at all.
Now, each one of you got that PowerPoint.
Yes.
Mr. Sizemore, I know you're on the phone. Did you have any questions?
No, I don't have any.
And I'm sorry I didn't share that with everyone. And Mr. Sizemore is joining us by phone.
I have a question about the $4 million you're talking about being left on the table. That was just for this past fiscal year alone?
Yes.
That we couldn't use, that was given to us for positions in the school?
Well, what they do is they look at your average, they look at each LEA's average salary as of December. Then for the next year's budget, they inflate that by any benefit increases or salary increases, and that becomes the average salary that they use to estimate what they are gonna be spending for that position this year. But because I was not able to transfer positions into another category and get dollars for them, I had to leave them in that allotment and use them for teachers. And because in the prior year, I had essentially moved the money for folks who were paid less than the average salary, which meant my average salary was higher. It's just like test scores or anything else. If you cut out the bottom quartile, your average goes up. I mean, you understand mathematically what I'm saying there? So my average salary, once they no longer let me do that, my average salary is gonna drop way down because I'm including those lower cost people in that allotment that I did not pay from that allotment last year. And I have to do that in order to use the money at all because they aren't letting me transfer it to use it for somewhere else. So my average salary is much lower than it was last year, and that's where that $4 million comes from.
So is any of that to do with the fact that maybe we had a lot of people retire that were at the higher salaries, and that's how your
I
salary was
think,
lower?
not for the current year. I think it's more simply that if you look at the number of positions that I was able to transfer out last year versus the restriction this year, I just had to pay more people out of that allotment and pay lower cost ones out of that allotment, which lowers my average. But the average they budgeted it at is the same average as was actual last year.
And there's no way we could have hired more people to
No,
use that money?
no, the dollars are really irrelevant on position allotments. The only thing they look at is days employed. And like in 2009-10, when I overspent it by $1 million, I wasn't in any trouble because, I left a half a day on the table. Out of the 10,000 days that our allotment was, I left a half a day on the table. So I didn't overuse the allotment. It was just they weren't expecting our teachers to cost so much because I moved everybody out who was paid less than the average salary, as did Ricky Lopes, as did Hank Hurd, who are now running the School Efficiency Consultants Group. But then in the middle year, last year, they restricted it somewhat. So my average went down compared to the prior year. But this current year, they essentially didn't let me transfer it anywhere but teacher assistants. And teacher assistants, you can only transfer to teachers. So, you know, given that we were already using those allotments for those two things anyway, it didn't give me much of anywhere to go. The only thing I could transfer out was instructional support positions, you know, which I did, but I meant every single teacher basically that had been state paid in the past still had to be state paid. I couldn't do the switcheroo like I did the year before, so my average was much lower. I may need to create a little scenario with some numbers like, you know, $1,000 salary so you can, you know, see. But, I mean, mathematically, I hope y'all understand how it works. I love math, not everybody does.
Mary, the basic premise for moving and doing all that is to stretch the dollars as far as you can
Absolutely.
possibly stretch them, right?
Absolutely, because the first year, like I said, I moved all the position allotments out to something else, and then I paid the lower paid teachers with dollars. Because, well, since they're not letting me do it anyway, I'm not sharing any secrets that I shouldn't be sharing. But the average teacher allotment, let's say, was $50,000, you know, including benefits and everything else. The cost of a beginning teacher with benefits and everything else was $35,000. Every position I transferred out, I got the $35,000 to spend in another category, and then I paid all my teachers out of federal money. I saved $15,000 for each position I did that with.
Right.
You know, and I mean, it added up to several $1 million. Well, then once I couldn't do that anymore, you can understand how the average salary goes down.
Right.
And I can no longer leverage that extra several $1 million. And between that, I had prepared this little chart to show you that over the 3-year period, there is a $5.8 million swing just in those 4 position allotments in terms of what I was able to utilize, because they keep restricting the rules.
And some of it had to do with the federal dollars that you had too, right?
Well, that's true, but one of the reasons that I paid teachers out of the stabilization funds was because with the state rules, which I think came from the feds, they counted exactly as a state position. So as far as principal pay and everything else, workers' comp, all that stuff, the state covered that. So there was absolutely no disadvantage to moving a teacher out of a state paid position and putting her over on the stabilization funds. Now, the EduJobs money that we have now, rules aren't the same. That's just like any other federal dollar. And if I were paying teachers out of there, they wouldn't count toward the principal's salary or anything else. So I'm paid mainly non-certified positions out of that. I mean, it was a combination of not being able to move the teacher positions out, and also there being some disadvantages to using federal funds to pay teachers versus non-certified employees.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I just want to go back to the fact that, you know, the budget amendment number 9, we received it, you know, because it is the end of the year. I understand it was, you know, like yesterday or maybe the day before, I don't know exactly. So there wasn't a lot of time to do, you know, the research perhaps needed to be done. But I just wanted to make that point.
So I guess to sum it up, Ms. Parker, you've done such a good job that caught on at the state about what's going on. And
I mean, it wasn't all my idea. Like I said, I did talk with Hank and Ricky, and also Carrie Crutchfield and Winston-Salem. We tend to get together and brainstorm.
well, thank you for stretching our dollars and all that we can. We have to do everything that we can. All right, so if there's no other questions or comments, all in favor of the budget amendment number 9, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Aye.
Okay. Moving on to the interim budget for next year. Do I have a motion to approve the interim budget for 2012-2013?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Seconded by Mr. Pless. All right, questions or comments? And I'll just say before we start, you know, basically without an interim budget, nothing goes on Monday.
Oh, no, without an interim budget, the gate is closed and locked and no employees
Right,
report.
exactly.
Because we have no authority to do anything.
And so basically, this is a partial budget to get us through until we get everything from the state, DPI, and everyone involved in our budget process, normally, I believe we approve our formal budget in years past in November. But,
That's what I was estimating again this year.
okay, so you think it'll probably be about the same?
I would hope so. I mean, I would think the General Assembly either tries to override the veto or goes home. And, you know, I hope by the end of July, we have initial allotments. We're kind of in uncharted territory right now on this, so, you know, if the allotments drag out longer, it could be longer, but I'd anticipate the November board meeting right
Okay.
now would be when we have a budget.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
I know you can't take our expenses and divide them by 12 and come up with a monthly type of expense. It doesn't work that way. But I was curious why, it's a 5-month budget and you divide it in half.
Because we pay the local supplement in November, and that affects the federal funds. There are a lot of employees who still have that as an instant payment, and that affects child nutrition, Fund 5, it affects
So
the
we-
federal grants, Fund 8.
So the answer to that is we have more expenses in the first 5 months than we do.
Well, you have lower, obviously, in July and August, because teachers aren't working and aren't getting paid, but November can be really, really high. So, I mean, in my assessment, those 5 months equal about half
And
the
that-
year for all the funds except state. The state, the reason it's so high is we tell schools, you know, order your supplies now.
Right.
They're for this year's kids, and there is a huge amount of state spending that goes on in September, you know, with the start of school. So that was why I didn't just do 5/12. That really wouldn't have been enough.
I mean, I'm
given the-
assuming that was, but I just
Yeah,
wanted to make
but
sure.
no, given our payment of the local supplement in November and the fact there's this huge surge at the start of school in non-personnel purchases, a half a year is about what it equals by the end of November.
Yeah, and I wanted to thank you for answering some of the questions I sent in advance related to the budget resolution. I'm still not sure I'm clear on the fact that, you know, some teachers are paid out of local money. So if this raise goes into effect, the 1.2% increase, where does that money for the raise, is all the money coming out of our own pot for these raises? Is the state funding those state teachers, the
No,
state paid teachers?
again, I had a good rehearsal trying to explain this to Julie Ball and why a raise that affects base salary is much more costly to us than a one-time bonus. What the state does when they give a raise that's to base salary like this, they look at the position allotments, they will cover it. Because like I said, on the position allotments, the dollars are just an estimate to give them some kind of idea what they spend. It really doesn't control our use of it at all. It's all strictly days employed, down to the half day. On the dollar allotments, though, they look at it on a statewide basis. They collect the data from all the LEAs, put it all together and say, okay, overall, 80% of this allotment is personnel. So if we take 1.2% times the total allotment and then take 80% of that, that's what the salary raise should be, and that's what they put in the allotment. Now, when it comes down to the individual LEA level, within that allotment, it means some LEAs get more money than it actually costs for the raises, and some get less. And what it tends to be is larger and, in a way, wealthier units, because we have a lot of local support, tend to get less than what it really costs to cover the raise. The reason for that is because if you're a poorer and smaller unit, because the formulas are oriented toward giving the smaller units more money. They usually have a base and then there's an ADM component on top of that. They are probably buying things out of that allotment as well as paying people. And that's particularly true of poorer units because they don't have local money as an option to go to for other things. So their mix is much less labor intensive than in a larger unit that has a lot of local support because, you know, Finance Officer 101 you know, you always want to pay a person out-of-state money versus buy a thing, because when you pay a person out-of-state money, the state pays their workers' comp, it pays their disability if they're injured, it pays their longevity, it pays their annual leave and terminal payments, things like that. You get a lot of add-ons when you pay somebody out of state. When you buy a thing out of state, all you get is what it costs. So what we all try to do is to put all our people on state and buy our things out of local. So it probably means I'm gonna end up short on the position allotments, which really covering the raise. And I'm probably gonna have to move some people that I paid out of state this year onto local as a result. So that's one effect of this. If it were a one-time payment, that would not happen. Because when there's a one-time payment, what the state usually does is creates another PRC, and you just charge the bonus payments there. It's never budgeted, it's never allotted, they just cover it, just like they cover longevity pay for state paid workers. So there's no issue of does the state money cover the state raise or not, it just automatically does. So I probably am gonna end up with some spillover from state, just because those allotments typically for us won't cover the raise. But then it affects the local supplement. The local supplement is a percentage of base salary, and out of local funds, we have to pay the local supplement for all state paid employees. So that local supplement that I paid for the state paid workers this year is gonna go up by 1.2%. Then for my local employees, I've gotta cover their 1.2% raise also. So that's the way it affects local. In terms of your question about teachers, I realized after I sent it that I left out a component of that. I've mentioned already the restrictions in the ABC transfer process caused me to pay more teachers out of state last year than I did the year before. But I did also for 1 month to use up the stabilization funds, pay some teachers out of that. So there's actually about another 1.2 million that we spent on teachers that normally would have been paid out of local. So it would have been about 4 million total that I would have normally paid out of local, that I instead paid out of state and federal during the current year.
All right, any other questions? All right, all in favor of the interim budget resolution for 2012-13, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Aye.
Okay, moving on, next on the action agenda is the personnel report. Do I have a motion to approve the personnel report?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Ms. Jackson, if you would let the record reflect that Mr. Bryant will be abstaining from voting on the Irwin High School math position.
One of them.
One of them.
On one of the Irwin High School math positions. Thank you.
All right, questions?
I'm still concerned, we still haven't come up with any sort of recruitment and selection policy for hiring the most highly qualified applicants. I don't feel I can be assured that this has been the case. Recently, we had 112 people apply for 13 principalships, which on average is 8.5 applicants per position, which to me is not a large enough pool to get diversity, to get the most talented people that we want for our kids. So I have those concerns, about this personnel report as well.
All in favor of the personnel report?
Could I ask a question?
Yes.
Dr. Baldwin, is that, it's my understanding when we advertise a principal's position, we advertise for a principal for the system.
We don't, well, the only difference this year is we did, because of the uniqueness of community high school being a turnaround model, we did actually pull that after the initial advertisement for, as you say, for general principalship, not identifying the schools. We did pool to identify maybe more specifics in that job and identify the school, correct?
Right, that's right. But it's also really not correct to say that we had 13 vacancies, because we moved people.
Mhm.
I mean, we ended up having, what?
4,
6
5.
vacancies.
Just-
Five.
Just to comment, I had the pleasure of going to that administrative retreat this week, and I was sitting at the table, and I just asked the question, how's the applicant pool, and and there are principals at the table, and all of them says the best it's ever been, it's the most number I've ever seen. I mean, so from their perspective,
For teaching position.
yeah, just, that's not what you were saying principals, but in general, they said over the lifetime of them being a principal or they're involved in the schools, they're getting more applicants now than they've ever gotten. So that was anecdotal, but.
Could I share, we shared
Absolutely.
today, you weren't there, Thursday, we did a personnel report for the principals. We have a record number of applicants. We have, since we went to HRMS in about 2005, 2006, we've been able to keep up with that number, and we have averaged between 8,000 and 9,000 a year. We already are at 10,000, and we're only halfway through the year. We had, in 1 week, we had 1,200 applicants. And our system will eliminate duplicates, and so those are not duplicate numbers. We had 1,200 people hit apply on our system. So, not for all positions certainly, I mean, I can't say that, but for many of our positions, we are very applicant rich right now.
Yeah, and I think it would be probably good if the board wants to do this, that we could look at some of that data as far as, there's certain schools maybe that people aren't applying for, if we can see how that's, I know other systems have used ways to address that problem where they're not getting enough applicants at certain schools or for certain types of positions. But just having that kind of data would be helpful.
Just a thought on that, and I'll be quiet, I'm sorry. But it just seems like that's micromanaging, that we need to let our principals, if they're having a problem, if the administration leadership sees that, then they do it. I don't think the board should be involved at that level, but that's my personal opinion. Thank you.
Well, I've been kind of lenient, but, we're dealing with a personnel report. We're not dealing with our hiring procedures today. All in favor of the personnel report, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Aye.
Okay.
And you're keeping me as an abstain from one.
Yes, sir.
Because my daughter was on
Yes, sir,
that.
thank you so much for reminding me.
All right, I'm going to go back to the last board meeting when it was 11 o'clock and I was cross-eyed. But we had a vote on some board member requests for information about the procedure. And Dr. Baldwin and our attorneys have talked about this, and so I want to turn it over to them and let them know.
Could we get the actual motion again that was passed? Could we read that slowly?
Motion was made by Mr. Bryant that all requests for individual board members, for information reports from any staff, Buncombe County School System, be put in writing, submitted to the superintendent through the board chair.
Submitted to the superintendent
There you
or the
go.
board chair?
Yes.
Yep, that's what I said.
Mr. Campbell?
I'm gonna let Dr. Baldwin
Okay.
address the issue.
I listened very carefully to that motion. I'll just say to the entire board that, in my opinion, I think it's important to clarify that motion is not about whether or not information is provided or not provided to the board. I think there's considerable proof that we do provide information as requested by both the entire board and individual board members. I think that information is very detailed and comprehensive as much as possible within reasonable bounds. And I also believe that it's provided in a reasonable time period. Where I believe the issue lies is in how it's provided. In other words, the structure and the timeline for response. I will say that I believe very strongly that for the efficiency and the effectiveness of our organization. Now realize we're the largest, we're the 11th largest school system in the state. That it's very important that board requests, whether again it's from the entire board, whether it's 2, 3 board members or individual board members, that request come directly to the superintendent. I say that not because you all have worked with me long enough to know that I don't have a huge ego. I don't. I left that behind the coaching business. But I do believe, again, from the efficiency, effectiveness standpoint, And then it becomes my responsibility, once I receive that request directly to me, to determine who in our school system is the best resource to assist me in getting you that information. You know, whether it be Ms. Parker in finance, whether it be Ms. Lopez in personnel, whether it be Mrs. Sellers, our elementary education coordinator. And then, at that point in time, once I identify those resources to the best of my ability, I'm going to put that information together and provide it to you, again, in a reasonable time period. There's another reason, too, that I think is very important. And again, you all know that I do this, and I try to do it on a very, very consistent basis. If, for example, Mr. Craig sends a request for information into me, I will not only send that information back to him, but I make a point to copy the entire board. Now, why do I do that? Because, again, that information that he's requesting, I think, could be very relevant for Lisa. And in many cases, parents are asking her the same question, or Mr. Bryant. So, again, it's very important that it comes directly to me. Now, I know I had that, that was an issue that came up. And so I asked our leadership team, I said, I want you to tell me, is there email that has come? And I'm saying this as the board. And understand, I'm saying the entire board. I'm not pointing out any individual board member. But I got back from one staff member this many emails and requests for information that came directly to them that I wasn't copied on. And again, it's the efficiency and the effectiveness. Now, our team members know that if a request comes in from an individual board member, entire board, or multiple board members, they know if they don't see that I've involved with it to bring it to me so that it's coordinated. But that's an additional effort. And again, I believe very strongly perception becomes reality, and I don't think it's the right thing to do to put an individual team member up here in this central office or in the schools in that position about, the fear I have is that they feel, let's drop everything and I need to respond to that board member. And so, that's the first thing I would say. And that's just in general. And that would apply to the entire board, to multiple board members requesting the same thing of individual board members. I want to reference the timeline and the structure because I think that's where the rubber hits the road. And I'm going to give you, again, just an example, the most recent example. I have the June 7th board meeting. Well under 48 hours before that closed session starts. And we usually start closed session between 5 and 5:30, so that's just the time reference. Well under 48 hours, I had a minimum of 6 requests for information that came in. Some came directly to me, others involved additional staff. Now, when that happens, because I understand, you will have some questions with information that's sent out. If it's a question that, I can easily access, I can go to Cynthia's office and say, this question came up, can you help me with this? Then what I've tried to do, and I think all of you have noticed, is when it comes to superintendent comments, I try to get that information out because, again, that's an opportunity for me to provide it to the entire board, as well as to me if it's individual, if it's 2 or 3 that's asked a question. But again, that time crunch, and I know one of the emails requested some pretty extensive information. And when it comes in that close to the board meeting, I think the perception is legitimate that Well, we gotta get this information before the board meeting starts. And so what can happen, depending upon the degree of information that has to be researched, it can take, let's say it's finance, it can take Mrs. Parker multiple hours. And let me tell you, we love Ms. Parker, but you know, if I go down there and I ask her for an answer to a question, you're gonna get, you could take her answer and you could go out and publish a book on it. I mean, she is the expert on it, and she is very detailed, and she explains it to the nth degree. I think that's an incredible quality. Thank goodness for our school system that we have that type of person. But it takes time, because as an encyclopedia of finance that she is, when you're asking for specific information, she's got to go back in and research. And I think everybody can understand that. And in many cases, Ms. Parker can't do it herself. She has to bring, it could be something to bring in Mr. Social with capital outlay. And I'm not saying that, again, it's not legitimate information to be requested. Don't get me wrong. But again, it's that timeline, and it's that feeling of, we got to get it done. And I know I use the word respect. I probably use the word disrespect. I explained it to this board earlier. You know, I try to operate for everyone. Anybody that walks in my door, I try to be very respectful. For whatever reason they come in from, whatever line of employment, from the child nutrition worker to Suzanne Swanger comes in my door. But I do think that it really is fall under the umbrella of respect. And I don't say that as a personal attack on anybody, but I think it is a respect issue on two counts. And the first is just the respect for what each and every person that works in this building and works in our 42 schools, their charge is to educate children. And the demands on them, each and every one of them, just the daily operations of the school. And I think that's a respect. As important as the information is, and understand what I said to preface this whole thing, it's not about getting the information or not getting the information. The information's going to be there. In this case, it's that timeline and that structure. And the second area of respect, maybe I do have some rabbit ears on it. Been in the athletic business, you know what rabbit ears are, don't you? Okay? If you've ever been an official, you know what rabbit ears are. If you ever been a parent spectator at an athletic event, you call referees. A lot of times you say they have rabbit ears. So sensitive to it, right? Maybe I am. But I live on a daily basis running this organization here in the central office, knowing that we have one of the thinnest central offices in the state. If you don't believe me, go look at facts. There's 6 less leadership positions in the central office than we were 3 years ago. So I know what I've done as superintendent to maintain the new norm. I've gone down to Cynthia Lopez, who is our personnel director, who's as good as I've ever worked around. You know what I've told her? I put something else on your plate, because I know that you have an interest in global education. Well, our personnel director right now is in charge of our global education initiative. And you all know how important to me that is. So I had to have someone that I know was going to take it and go with it. But it's not just her. I can go through this whole building, and that's exactly what I've done. So yeah, you know, when it's coming in, I've got to make sure to protect that it's not an overload on them, because of the tremendous amount of responsibility they have, just the daily operations to get things done. So I'm just speaking from the heart of things.
Chris, count.
So what Dr. Baldwin and I did was we met, and he basically told me exactly what he just told all of you. So in knowing that the motion had been passed by a majority of the board and it needed to be tweaked, I took his comments and I put them into a framework that I thought would work, because obviously the application of a process is always the difficult part, is how are you going to apply that process. As I go through these, keep two examples in mind, two easy examples. I think it always helps to frame the discussion. Take a request right before a board meeting for the school violence report from the previous year. Single document submitted to the state. It is a matter of pushing a button and emailing it to somebody, okay? Then take a board member who says, I am interested, whether it's before the board meeting or not, I, an individual board member, I'm interested in us outsourcing our transportation department. I think that we should hire a private company to operate all our buses and transport all our students. I would like for you in the transportation department to compile a report for me of the annual costs for transportation, so that we as a board, I as a board member, can see in the open market what would it cost to operate a transportation system versus what we're paying now. So those are not documents that are in existence. Those are not subject to the public records law. A member of the public, can come in and say, I'd like this document or that document. A member of the public can't say, I'd like you to do a report. Well, the board should be able and is able to dictate to the staff and the superintendent to do reports and to analyze things and compile things and put them together. But I think everyone sees the point. It's not answering questions, it's a process for answering questions, because what if two of you or three of you want the superintendent and finance officer or the transportation department to engage in a study that in good faith is going to take 30, 40, 50 hours to pull information together? Well, in our democracy, if a majority of the board wants that, then the staff will do it. But if a majority of the board doesn't want it, there's no obligation to spend 30, 40 hours on something, and then everything in between. I've given you two examples, but we all know that the requests usually fall somewhere between those two examples that I've just given you. So keep that in mind as I work through these. So taking what Dr. Baldwin told me and what I just told you folks, what I crafted would be an amendment to the motion that was passed at the last board meeting. Again, we have told all of you that no, and it's in this amendment, but I'll say it again, no action of this board will do anything regarding the public records law and the right of you as citizens to come to the superintendent and say, I want a public record. Nothing would ever inhibit that, and it clearly says that in this. So here are the revisions, and I'll work through them. The motion to amend would be, number one, that all board member requests for information from school staff must be directed to the superintendent. Requests shall not be directed to other staff. That's his request, that you funnel it through the superintendent. He's just giving you the reasons of making sure the right people answer it, getting responses to all of you, and getting the information back to you. Number two, the superintendent must make discretionary decisions on how to expend staff time and resources, and he may refer the board member back to the chair to discuss the request further. So it's an out for the superintendent. Before I have my staff engage in something that is going to take 30 hours of man hours to compile and produce, is that something that the board wants to be done? Is that a direction the board is going in? If it's not, then the superintendent can say to any of you, that's not something that's currently on our plate. That would take a lot of staff time and resources. I'm going to refer you back to the chair. And as you know, we have a process. If a board member wants the staff to look into something, it can be brought to the full board, and then the full board decides. I hope we can all agree as rational people that before the administration would undertake a 30 or 40-hour study on transportation costs for the purpose of outsourcing transportation, that would be something a majority of the board would want the staff to look at. Otherwise, they're spending the time that you and the taxpayers have otherwise paid them to do, doing other things that are requested at that point. So that is available to the superintendent. Again, your ethics statement says that you delegate to the superintendent and his staff the running of the school business. And folks, I think we know the tension is always going to be, is a board member acting like the superintendent or wanting to be a superintendent too much, or is the board member advocating policy? And each of you can disagree, issue by issue, as to whether the actions of a board member are getting into running the school system or an issue of policy. All this says is that if a majority of you have not asked the superintendent to do it and he believes it's going to take too much time, he can refer you back to the chair and you can have a very pleasant discussion and then bring it to the full board as needed. So it's just an out for the superintendent. Number three, any request to the superintendent for information that comes 48 hours, and that was what Dr. Baldwin wanted, 48 hours, prior to a board meeting must simply be copied to the chair for review and consultation with the superintendent regarding a response as needed. Take my 2 examples. It is 2 hours before a board meeting. You ask the superintendent for a copy of the violence report, you copy the chair, superintendent shoots it to you in an email. Doesn't even call the chair, doesn't bother with it. And that's what Tony Baldwin has done and will continue to do with your requests. However, if you are asking for data and it's going to take 6 or 7 hours to pull it together, is that something that the staff has time to do on the eve of a board meeting, within 48 hours of a board meeting? It gives the superintendent somebody by your procedure and protocol to call, and that's the chair, and say, I've got this request, here's what it's gonna take, what do you think? The two can discuss it, and then that chair is the person dealing with the board member, which I think is appropriate. Y'all should deal with each other on issues, and the chair or the superintendent can call the board member back and go, no problem, answer's coming, or what you've asked involves 3 different people and 3 different reports. Dr. Baldwin's happy to do it, but you're gonna get an answer probably Monday. There's no way the staff can pull that together before the board meeting. Fair enough. Again, it's a process. It's not dealing with what's being asked for. And then number 4, what I said earlier, this procedure does not alter the responsibilities of the superintendent as records custodian under the public records law. This policy also does not affect your ability to ask questions and engage in discussions during board meetings. Doesn't affect that at all. This is requests to the superintendent. Email requests in this modern age is how that is done primarily. Other telephone calls, things, but this is how the procedure would be for the request for that information. Doesn't affect your right to ask questions during the meeting or anything of that nature. So that was my attempt to take what he's told you and kind of put it as a modification to the previous motion.
So that's interesting. I mean, we just received
My-
budget amendment 9 within 48 hours. How can I can't even ask any questions about it?
No, ma'am,
Ms. Ball.
let me repeat that though. No, it's a good question.
Is it okay to discuss it now?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I'm finished. That's a great question. No, what this says is that if it is within 48 hours and you have a question about it, simply copy the chair. You're fine to call the superintendent, you're fine to email the superintendent, as long as if you do a written request, you just copy the chair. It's just a procedure. Superintendent will then deal with you if he can give you the information immediately, but if he feels like it's an issue that is more time consuming than you may realize or whatnot, he has the ability to call the chair, discuss it with the chair, and then do a response. He doesn't have to. He's not, this doesn't change the way he's been operating whatsoever. What it says to you board members, and that's probably the best way to do this, what does this policy do to you as board members? What this procedure, and I'm also suggesting you give this a try. I mean, let's see how this works. Let's revisit this in 6 months if it's not working. If you've got a request for information, go through him. That's all it means. If it's within 48 hours of a board meeting and you want questions answered, data compiled, just copy the chair so that the chair also knows in case the chair and the superintendent want to discuss. That's all it means. It is not a prohibition on getting answers at any time to anything, because you can't. And I think we could all agree as rational adults, there's no way you can draft a policy that would address all the nuances of requests for information that could come to a superintendent or a staff at any time. It's not an attempt to do that.
What is different? I mean, the protocol I've discussed with Dr. Baldwin is that he's always copied on my emails, or else I send it to him when I have a question for a member. I don't know what precipitated the motion in the first place. Maybe somebody can shed some light, Mr. Bryant, why the motion was even made to begin with.
Do we need to make a motion and second before we discuss this?
Yeah, at this point, that procedure would be appropriate. That this would be a motion second, and then you can continue discussion.
Would anyone like to make the motion that we adopt these procedures?
I'd like to make the motion that we adopt the procedures outlined in this.
All right, is there a
As an
second?
amendment to
As
the.
an amendment.
Okay, all right. I just thought we should get a motion and a second before we discuss it too much further. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Mr. Bryant.
The reason for my motion was not to, nor does it say it, to take away from anything that involves freedom of information. It doesn't say that, nor did it say anything about asking questions during a board meeting. My motion was in reference just to what he's talking about here tonight. And what jumped at me, and I had been thinking about it, was at 7:37 or 6:37 the night before the board meeting, the long request to Ms. Parker to answer all those questions as related to the budget amendment at the last board meeting was made after work hours the night before the board meeting. In my opinion, and apparently in the opinion of most of the board, that was inappropriate. It's too close to time. They are hired to do a job. Part of that involves providing information for us, but the taxpayers of Buncombe County are paying them to do a job when it takes the amount of hours that it takes from Mary Parker or Ms. Lopez or whomever it happens to be, excuse me. On a short turnaround like that, I just don't think that's appropriate. I don't think that's proper protocol. That's why I made the motion. Not to ever stop quality, productive debate or discussion in a board meeting, or quality, productive questions during a board meeting. It doesn't say that, nor did I intend that, and I thought we discussed that when the motion was made and it was seconded before we voted on it. That's the reason I made the motion.
Well, wouldn't it seem that I was giving her some advance notice on the questions on the budget amendment rather than waiting to the meeting to ask those same questions?
As I read it, you were asking for compilation of data and a report. Her response that she got back to you in email at Mary helped me, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, the day of the board meeting, sometime late that afternoon, was given back to you in that manner. Now, that may not have been what you intended, and it may not have been what her thought process was, but as I looked at it, that's what happened. It was a request for a compilation of not existing. There was, how many people had to be involved?
I had 4 total people.
4 people involved. How many hours a day? 2, 4, 6?
No, it was over 20 hours.
Okay. In my opinion, that's not a good expense of taxpayer dollar at that point. I have no problem with the request. Let's just do it at a time where they've got a fair amount of time to put that information together for you, for Mr. Craig, for Ms. Franklin, for me, or whomever it happens to be. That's my point. Not to take away from the request, that's my
Just to clarify,
point.
it was only to ask questions about the budget amendment so that I would have enough information to vote, to make an informed decision when I was voting on it.
Well, the budget amendment was online on, help me, Ms. Jackson, Thursday?
Friday night by 5 o'clock
Friday.
before the next Thursday's board meeting. That's the rule for regular
And I
meetings,
think
not
we
special
had-
calls.
I don't know, 60 items on that agenda, possibly. We had a lot of stuff to vote on, a lot of information to read.
And part of the process, to me, I mean, and I supported his motion, was that it could just simply, we don't, Mary Parker, I mean, I guess indirectly reports to us, but there's a report structure. And I think if I was Mary Parker and I got a request from a board member, it would carry a lot of weight and was like, dang, I gotta drop everything and do this. Whereas if it goes to the superintendent, or originally we're gonna be the board, but I like the idea of it going to the superintendent, he can look at that and determine how, the amount of time, and it follows the proper structure. And I think that's why would support the motion that Mr. Campbell brought up.
Well, and I think it's also important that, there have been emails that have been sent out where board members have asked for the compilation of materials that are not readily available and would take considerable amount of time for the staff, to put all that information together. And that's something the board needs to make a decision on, not an individual board member, as to whether we want that compiled in that manner or not. And so it's important that it go through the superintendent. And I will say that for the most part, everyone on the board is pretty good about copying me on a lot of things that they do. And I think it's important as a general rule to really try to copy all board members, anytime, just as, because a lot of times some of the questions that come up may be, you may have the same question. So,
And I have to jump in and say, and you all know what I'm gonna say.
Don't answer.
respond.
Do not
Right.
engage in debate
Do not engage.
over email.
Right.
I am concerned, there's no cases on it, but I think everybody sees the concern that the open meetings law wants you to
You
do
can do
this.
that.
Well,
in front
and
of the
I will say
public,
that
and email can be abused.
this board is
so-
pretty good. Mr. Sizemore's warned me a couple of times that maybe I was getting too close to that, but for the most part, the board is good about not debating via email, and that's good. But I just think, and like I say, it was 11 o'clock. I was about cross-eyed by the time this came up. If the perception was that we were trying to stop information, I apologize. That was not the intent of anything that I said in the meeting in regards to your motion. I think that, we have a very open process. I think it's just a matter of making sure, especially with the number of positions that we have lost in the central office and around our school system, that we do it in a orderly, efficient manner as to how the information is gone about, and if we want to spend the time to get that information pulled together. But as far as any public information, state information that's available, I mean, we can't stop, we don't have the authority to stop any of that information.
Nor do I.
Right.
Nor do we.
So, anyway, any other questions or comments?
Well, I have some more comments and questions. I'm very concerned, I think private citizens could ask, let's say, for example, Ms. Sellers, could go and ask her a question, is that correct? If they wanted information about early elementary curriculum or education.
They can ask her that down in her office, they can ask her by the phone, they can ask her in the grocery store.
But as a school board member, I can't do that. I have to go through a gatekeeper, I have to go through the superintendent to ask Ms. Sellers. I have to ask him, and he's gonna go ask Ms. Sellers to respond to my request. That's what this is all about. And then you're gonna throw in another gatekeeper, and I've gotta go to the board chair, if it's less than 48 hours, if we pass this amendment, he's gotta be a gatekeeper.
It was just a
too.
copy of the email.
Right. Well, in the original motion, you're the gatekeeper.
Well, we're talking about the amendment now, right?
So, and I do know, even in Buncombe County, that Wanda Green, who's the financial officer for the county, was sued because she was acting as a gatekeeper of information. And she lost the lawsuit. The citizens won. So this is the same situation where we're instituting a gatekeeper. And the previous procedure I thought was fine. I did not mind copying Dr. Baldwin when I had questions of staff, and he agreed with that and said that was fine.
Has that always been done? You've got a file there that you
Well,
said is not in that case?
again,
Maybe we can pass that
You're-
around and
you're
look at it
asking-
too. I'd like to
Is that
see
me?
that.
Have I done that?
we've got situations where it went directly to staff members, that question, and I wasn't copied on it.
Yeah, could you pass the folder around? I'd like to see
Be
those.
glad to.
Well, where the problem arises is when a member of the staff is asked to compile information, and then if they don't respond in a timely manner to that, or they get threatened with their job, that's a problem.
What kind of threat
Well,
is
you sent, there's a copy of an email
Their
where
job.
Ms. Parker was told she would be reported to DPI if she didn't compile information in a certain manner.
Not what I said. I just said, should I ask Phil Price, the Chief Financial Officer for DPI? If she couldn't provide the information, I thought perhaps he could.
Well, why would you think that he could provide that information?
Because he's the Chief Financial Officer for DPI.
And so
For
he has
the
all the Buncombe
systems.
County information?
Yes, perhaps, I would think.
Perhaps.
I would think he would have that information. At least I could ask
I think a
him.
reasonable person, and I didn't see that, it sounds like you did, just from what I hear, I think a reasonable person would infer that that's a threat to someone's position. I would feel that way. If I were working in a situation where a board member put that into whether it be verbally or in an email, I'm not sure how it happened or what was said, I would construe that as a threat. And that's not appropriate. I don't want Ms. Baldwin, myself, or anybody to not be able to ask Ms. Sellers, the example you used, a question. But if that question involves Ms. Sellers having to take time and put together information into a quality report to answer a question, and I'll use the two examples he used, one was very much different than the other. And that's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the other thing, nor do I think Dr. Baldwin's talking about that.
And I prefaced that early on, and let me just emphasize that one more time. I've had calls from every single one of you, every single one of you. In some cases, some of you more than others. And if it's an answer I can give you, you're gonna get that answer. Now, if you're asking me something and I don't know the answer, I'm gonna go back and find the right resource, because the last thing I wanna do is give you inaccurate information. But when that request goes to Ms. Lopez, and even if I'm copied on it, I don't have that, I've got to run her down. I could be at my elementary school. And we've got to do that coordination piece versus it coming to me and then sitting down with her. That's where I'm trying to show you, if we can centralize this, you're gonna get your answer. Now, if you're telling me that you're asking me questions and I'm not giving you answers, I've never heard that from you. Now, if that's something that we need to have a discussion, everybody in here. Jerry Rice knows what an open door policy I've got. And certainly for the board, it's open. We'll talk about that.
Well, and Mr. Chairman, too, I think Ms. Long raises a good point. Many of you being district reps have reasons from time to time to talk to principals or hear about things going on. I think that an appropriate amendment would be that this relate to central office staff. Because let's deal with the issue that, from my understanding and talking to Dr. Baldwin, really affects this board, is that you're wanting accurate system-wide district level information. So I think an appropriate amendment to this amendment would be that it only relate to central office staff. And then common sense, what Dr. Baldwin can tell principals is, look, answer board members' questions, work with board members as you always have, but just remember that if a board member is asking you to spend time and resources on something, you are to very politely ask them to run it through me. I mean, in some way, it's a procedure, folks. You know, we don't need the Supreme Court to decide this. I think
Well, I think
it
it's
sounds to me,
fascinating
so I
that-
think that would be a good way to do it, is just to change that, and then to go that way. But it's just a procedure, that would be put in place, but I would recommend that this just apply to central office staff, because I agree. I think from time to time, y'all have a need to talk to principals and others, and I don't want a motion in any way to even be argued that it would prevent that.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. We just passed a 4-page budget that's over $250 million. And you just passed a four-pager that had totals for each one of these. Nobody wanted a line item budget, which is what I've been talking about since I got on the board. Because that would cost too much work for Ms. Parker to compile.
Is that
But she
the
already
interim-
has that
is that
information,
the
because she
interim
has to do the
budget?
roll-up
We've
for
already-
each one of these.
We've
We already have that.
We've
I'm
already
giving an example
Will
right
I respond to
now
that example?
of not asking Ms. Parker to compile data for us. Now, this is what would come from the board as a whole. It would be a motion I would make. I'd say I move that the board receives line item detail on the 2012-2013 budget they're voting on, for example. And that, usually when I make motions like that, I don't get a second, or I do and everybody votes no. Because we don't want to cause too much work, or these are kind of motions that come from the board as a whole, not an individual. I haven't asked Ms. Parker or anybody to compile data for me in a new format. I merely ask for clarification on things I'm voting for in meetings. So that's an example. Most of these motions come from the board.
But just, the only thing I was gonna say is those aren't new numbers, those are the same numbers we've been talking about for quite a while. So it's not like we haven't talked about these numbers, it's just 5/12 or 7, whatever. It's half, that's right.
And I had asked-
But it's half of the numbers that we've already looked at and we've already analyzed, and that we've already gotten detail on.
In the budget work
No, we
session.
In the
haven't gotten
work
detail.
session.
We did not.
We
get
haven't
line
gotten the
item
detail to your
no.
level yet.
No.
Okay.
Well, I will say in response to what you just said, the email that we were talking about specifically stated that you wanted a different version of the county numbers.
I can't recall what you're talking about, the different version of what county numbers. Well, the county appropriation, when we were voting in May, as to what the budget we're requesting
Well,
for them.
I'll get a copy.
I just asked for clarification because we had a 220
In the email that you sent Ms. Parker,
appropriation for the
you
community high school.
specifically asked her to compile you a different budget of the county numbers because you did not want to flip between different documents.
Okay, well, I had asked, right, because it's not
So
a
you,
different
so you did ask.
compilation.
You just said that you did not ask, but you did.
Well, I'm understanding what you're saying. I wanted to know what was in Fund 2. Okay, so I had to go through this budget handbook. This is not a new compilation that she would have to do. This is a push of a button on a computer to print out what's in Fund 2. I had to go through this whole book and highlight every time I saw a number 2. These are number 1s. For example, here you can see some of my highlighting. This is from Fund 2. where I highlighted. So I had to go through this book. I mean, can you imagine, I could tear out every page and paste them up here to try to see where, you know, the Fund 2 fits in. That to me is not out of the ordinary to just want the Fund 2 list on, you know, on however many pieces of paper it
But if
takes.
we
But
want
it's
Ms.
not this
Parker-
entire book that I had to go through and highlight to find out
That
what was
should
in the
be-
county budget we sent to the commissioners.
That should be a board decision, not an individual board member decision.
But see, it already exists, Fund 2. I mean, to me, that is not a new format. This is already in existence. She just pushes the button and says, print out Fund 2. And
Can I just
that's
clarify too, though, again, since, you know, we have stakeholders in the room, just to clarify that, I think the reason that we have such a thick budget book, if I'm not mistaken, Ms. Parker went back and put multiple forms of that information out to try to help to find a way that would be better easily to access. There's about 5 to 6 different forms of the same information, and I've talked to a lot of superintendents. We're one of the rare systems that have gone to that extreme to try to put different models out there, the same information.
No, this is just where she took the strategic plan and made the budget fit the strategic plan, because I had said I would like to see our strategic plan align with our budget, okay? So after the fact, in January, after we passed the budget back in December of last year, in January, then we get the book to find out what we voted on. You know, this is a great format. I've appraised it because it does have the strategic priorities and has the budget aligned with it. However, the way it was developed is questionable because the priorities were put, the numbers were put in there, you know, not in they were not developed according to the strategic plan, okay? They were made to fit the strategic plan. That was the problem.
Any other questions or comments?
I have one more comment, if I can find it on this paper here. Yes, the information I gave you is directly related to this whole issue. We had a whole session on Wednesday at the North Carolina School Board Association meeting, and I've put in everybody's grade folder is a list of questions that board members are supposed to ask. We are supposed to ask for information and for data. And one problem I see, I'm having to ask a lot of questions because I am not getting data in the type of format that I should be getting it as a board member. And I've given you some examples from Wake County. And that's what the large sheet is. This is only 2 pages. This is a 2-pager right here. And this gives me a snapshot of every school in our district. Across the top, you'll see the school systems. This is called the Healthy Schools Report. This is from Wake County, and this is something they do for over 160 schools. And so we could simply do this for our 42 schools. And you get the different categories. You can't read, I apologize. I'll tell you what they are. The color didn't come out. Performance and academics is your first category. And you can instantly see how many kids are proficient on EOGs.
What
How
does
many
this have to do
schools
with the
that
budget?
expected growth.
What does this have to do with the
We're not,
budget?
we're talking about the amendment on the table right now, the procedure we have to go through to get information. And I'm saying it would be not so necessary to ask so many questions if we were
Well, no,
getting
you were
data in
pulling
an
up the budget
appropriate
book and talking about the
format.
budget. That's where I'm
And you're
confused.
distracting us from what the topic is at hand.
The topic at hand is we have a motion on the floor in a second about the amendment to what we did before. Is that
About
correct?
requests for information. And I'm saying, well, we're not getting
Now we're talking about
information
Wake
in a
County.
timely data, a
This Wake
timely
County?
manner. Let me finish, please. For example, if we're supposed to vote on issues and we don't get that, maybe we need to add another amendment to this to say, well, we want to receive information from the administration 7 days in advance so that we will have time to ask questions and not have to wait 48 hours. Or let's have them give us the information we need to make the right decisions, to make informed decisions for our constituents, for the children of this county. So there's a whole section of this on student populations, the demographics of the students, the number of AIG kids, the number of special ed kids.
Ms. Ball,
There's
I
a
think we,
facility report
hold on
on
a second,
here.
I think we're getting a little bit off the topic.
No,
with
we
it.
are
Yes,
not.
absolutely we are.
It's all
This is-
about information
I told you that I would
requests.
give you time to talk about this after we finished.
But this is the reason that this is here is because it's all about
Well, and here again,
About
this is something
the fact that
that
we're not
if we
getting
as
the
a
data we
board
need to
direct
make
the,
informed decisions. That's why we have to ask so many questions.
In your opinion.
and here again, as a board, if we vote for the superintendent and his staff, I got it, yeah.
Is he back?
Steve?
You gotta hit the speaker.
Is he there?
Steve,
I see a green light, but I can't tell what.
Did you hit the speaker?
are you there? Mr. Sizemore?
He can
He's in bad sales.
Can I bring it back to the motion and kind of summarize? I think, go ahead and answer that. So, because I think this has been. a
Are you
very-
there?
Steve?
He's gonna have to pick it up and then put it on speaker for a second.
If the majority does not in favor of looking at an issue, then the desires of one board member cannot result in the administration being required to do anything. But board members should have information. They should get all their questions answered. And what you're doing right now is a ninth grade civics lesson, and I don't want that to be lost. I don't want anybody, there are going to be very real disagreements as to whether this is the level of information that this board should have, or whether the level of information you're currently getting is enough. And nobody's right or wrong. Those are opinions. So this motion does one simple thing. It just says if you want the central office to look into something or put something together, you need to go through the superintendent. His track record has been that he responds. I've seen all, no, pick it up.
Say hello.
Hello? Yes.
Just tell him goodbye.
You there?
Are you there?
Hang up, you gotta hang up.
Now,
Are you there?
Are you still there?
the speaker button went off.
Well,
You
I'm
come
just
do it.
calling.
That's okay, that's not in the chairs, but on the screen.
All right, we'll let Connie do it.
Steve, are you there? No, he didn't really mean to. Hold on.
Yes, he did.
Hang on. You there?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Yay for Connie.
I'm technologically impaired, I'm sorry.
So Steve, you get the end of my closing argument.
I did.
So in
Okay,
summary.
I will, yes.
Yes, you will. So in summary, you're not going to resolve this issue today or maybe even ever between what some of you would like to see, what others would like to see. The law is that board members need to ask questions and get answers to their questions. The law and the ethics is also that you delegate to the superintendent to run the school system, and you are not hired as superintendent. There's always going to be a tension. So I just want to bring it back to the motion. This is relevant to the discussion, but this is not an attempt to deny information or dictate how information will be compiled or not compiled. He's going to deal with that like he always has on a case-by-case basis. This just does it orderly, so in all fairness, the central office staff knows, should they drop everything they're doing today and work on this or not, that's a decision that's going to be made by the superintendent. If he feels like it's going to take a lot of time and effort, it'll be a decision made by all of you. And if one of you feels like something should be looked into and the rest of you do not want the staff spending time looking into it, it's not going to be looked into. And that doesn't mean that someone's wrong, and it doesn't mean that someone's trying to prevent information from coming out. It just means a majority of the elected board does not want to look into a particular issue. So, again, the motion is all about just the simple process. And I just wanted to bring it back to where we started, because y'all can't agree on
that
this.
very well. Since we have Chris Campbell's legal opinion, I wanted to relay Roy Cooper, the Attorney General's legal opinion. And his opinion is that the open meetings and public records laws are to bring us towards transparency. We always want to move towards that. We want to move towards openness. We want to allow information requests as much as possible. We want it to be, always moving towards openness. This procedure you've outlined is moving towards closedness, if that's a word. It is not moving
And I
towards openness.
don't think the procedure in any way affects what he's saying about the openness of government. All this is who are you going to direct your question to? It's that simple. So no, I don't think it
It's
reflects
directing it to the
transparency.
gatekeeper.
Right, it's a legal matter, but your opinion is
My
certainly,
opinion now.
absolutely, yeah, yeah, so I'm not disagreeing
As
with
this
you. I just wanted to
procedure
say he's
creates
talking.
the concept of the gatekeeper, and that is completely opposite to the intention of the open meetings law and public records law, and it's something I totally cannot support because it's not fair to my constituents.
Why are you opposed to sending any request to Dr. Ball?
I already try to do that as a courtesy. Now, there may be times when I accidentally leave him off as a copy, and that's just,
I can't
you know,
imagine
my
you
problem.
accidentally leaving the superintendent off as a copy.
It can happen, yes, sometimes you're in a hurry when your kid wants to use the computer and you push the send button. But,
But why would you be sending the request? I guess I'm trying to understand. I hear you saying something different than what you sound like the reality was. I hear you saying your intent is to send it to him, and yet your first two is not to him, it is to someone else.
and I've discussed this with him. I said, can I put you as a copy? And he has told me yes, that I could copy him and put it to someone else.
Well,
So,
all right, this is a board procedure that we can vote on. You can vote yes or no. But I think it's important, talking about openness, that, you know, when, anytime there's an email or something that goes along the lines of accusations against the school system or school employee, those things should be shared with the superintendent also. Would you agree?
Sure,
Yes. Thank you.
any accusations.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm just trying to, do you understand the issue if you ask Mary Parker for a bunch of information? I mean, do you understand his first description of one's really quick, easy to get, and the others takes, 5 days to complete? Do you want the power to be able to have Mary do the 5 days?
I
of
don't
work?
think, I have never asked anyone to
Or
do that
20
much
hours,
work.
or 20 hours, or 20 hours. Or 20
Questions I
hours.
asked her to clarify,
But do you-
issues on our agenda
you
that
want-
I'm voting on.
Do you want the power to directly ask Mary Parker to do 20 hours of work? Is that the
haven't-
rub?
I think that's not relevant because I've just asked questions. I haven't asked people to compile data in new formats that didn't previously
Let me ask
exist.
one more time.
There would
I'll
be
ask
more
that
than a push
one
of a
more time.
button.
If the question takes 20 hours to respond to, are you frustrated because you don't have the power to ask Mary directly to
No,
do that?
of course not. I would expect an employee to say, well, look, this entails more work than you probably realize, you know, and that sort of thing, that communication process.
That's good.
you know.
All right, and so one amendment to the motion is that we're dealing with information that's asked from the central office. If you want to call the principal and ask a question, that's certainly.
The original mover and second, accept that amendment? I can't remember.
I don't know.
Yeah.
It was, I have to go back.
Steve just said yes.
It
What
was-
you see-
I
seconded
the motion, I
Yeah,
believe.
Chip made the motion.
That's
and
right,
so-
Chip
Okay.
and Pete seconded.
So, yeah, this is an amendment to the motion today, so you're the mover.
Yeah.
So you
Okay.
accept the amendment.
You're okay with that amendment?
Correct, yes.
Thank you.
Is it appropriate for our attorney to make a motion in a board meeting?
He didn't make the
He's not
motion.
elected.
He didn't make the motion.
Well, he read it to us. To me, he wrote the motion, and then somebody decided to make it.
That is appropriate, yes.
Okay, that's
Sure.
true.
And all I did was take the thoughts of the superintendent for y'all to consider. It didn't have to be a motion, but Mr. Craig chose it to be a motion.
All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Aye.
Okay. Okay, consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved. So moved. Oh, sorry, go
Is there a
ahead.
second?
Second.
All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. Ms. Baldwin, I'll give you a couple of minutes to talk about your sheets.
Thank you. The gray folder, as I mentioned, is what I received at the North Carolina Board Association.
Yes.
I have a feeling I'm going to hit an area where I'm going to drop the call, but since we've gone through all the action items, I'm going to,
Okay.
I will not call back in.
All right, I think I can hang up on you.
Okay, all right, yeah, I think you can.
You've proven that.
All right, thanks, Mr.
And I'll put a packet together for Steve as well, since he couldn't be here. Right, if you go to probably the back of the right side of the folder, there's a handout that looks like this. It's called the Data Decision Making Cycle Questions School Boards Should Ask. So,
Who is the Center for Public Education?
Patty Barth is the director, and she did the presentation at the school board meeting. In fact, the North Carolina School Board Association is partnering with her.
So this is
And wanting to work with her
this is their
group.
paperwork,
And
this
you'll
is not North
find-
Carolina School Board Association.
Right, you'll find her contact information on the very back page of the PowerPoint. It's called Data First. She has 2 websites, but it's the Center for Public Education. It's at the top of the letterhead, and this datafirst.org. But there's something in the works right now with the School Board Association to have a partnership with Patty Barth and her group. So I just wanted to make you aware of the types of questions school boards should be asking for, the baseline data information, et cetera, student outcomes, all those questions. The other information I did get from the Wake County School Board, and as we were talking about, the large sheet is called the Healthy Schools Report, and it gives you a snapshot it would give us a snapshot of every school in Buncombe County, whether the school is overcrowded, under-enrolled. It gives you not only that facilities data, a time frame if there's going to be renovations. It gives you the technology the school has. They have computer labs, laptops. It gives you demographic data on the students, the number receiving and percent receiving free and reduced lunch. So it's a great tool for decision making. It goes on across the top is where they have each school listed. But this is what I was talking about when I said a data dashboard at the last meeting, that we would have this type of information at our fingertips basically to make informed decisions. I mean, right now we have some serious concerns and some
Ms.
serious
Baldwin,
problems with
just
capacity.
present that as is. and-
Okay. The other information I gave you, they're white sheets I gave you, but they're really green in the Wake County system. It's sort of a fact sheet. It gives you a synopsis of what you're voting on your agenda, and they actually give these out at the work session. They hold a work session the day of their regular school board meeting. And, I brought up work sessions would be
Ms.
helpful
Baldwin?
for us. Okay. So what I like about this is they give you the topic first, then they tell you the person in the central office, the liaison person, the department chair or whoever that's responsible for this. And the one example, the single sheet is GPS system for their school buses. So then they give you a background. They give you a 1 paragraph, or sometimes it's just a couple sentence summary of what this is all about. Then they give you the fiscal implications. So how much is this going to cost the school system? So they give you that information, and then they give you the savings. If this is going to, in turn, investing in this GPS system, are there some cost savings to be realized from doing this system? So, and then they give you what their recommendation is, and what that liaison person. So this is just a 1-pager that really breaks down the agenda items and what you'll be voting on, and gives you another snapshot of what you need to know. You need to know if there's a cost to it. You need to know if it's actually going to end up saving the school system money. The other, what was a green sheet again with Wake County, another fact sheet. And this is one I brought up because it's very similar to something we're doing right now in Buncombe County with the STEM high school. But they want a career and technical high school. So they're asking for board approval to develop this program, to develop a model for this CTE high school. And I think this is something we could look at, because we have not given approval to look
Ms.
into the
Baldwin,
STEM high school.
we're not discussing that.
So I just wanted to give you this information. My hope is that should we set a time that maybe we can talk about these data formats, if we want to request this from our school system, Bob, would that be appropriate?
Well, as I said, we may be having a work session sometime either in August or September.
Okay.
Maybe we can discuss it at that time.
Okay. that sounds
Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you. Everybody have a good July. Next board meeting is August 2nd.
Through the woods.